Good day, everybody, and welcome to this fourth edition of Questions for the Pastor. This week will be the last week for a little bit, as I am going to our National Assembly, and I'm also out of questions. So if you have any questions that you wanted to ask, please write them in the comments, and we'll see if we could do a video of it when I get back from National Assembly. I keep wanting to call it Synod Assembly, but it's a National Assembly. So pray for us as we gather together. And as I thought, since this is happening, I thought I'd do a little video, since some people regularly ask me what's the difference between, say, the ELCA and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, LCMS. Or what's the difference between the Lutheran Church and the other Lutheran churches around? And so this is not going to be a comprehensive video, as there's a long history of the Lutheran Church in America. But I wanted to just give a kind of a brief oversight of maybe the five biggest denominations that are Lutheran denominations that are in the area. Again, this is going to be broad brushing a lot of information, because I'm sure there's little nuances here and there. I am also not familiar with some of them. I mean, I know them by name. I can look them up and research them, but I have never sat in one of their worships or sat with some of the pastors to talk to them. Take it as it is, as somebody that is just reading about them, rather than somebody sitting in the pews, so to speak, and learning from that perspective. Because I think that's also more important when it comes to learning, is to sit down with somebody and talk back and forth and say, hey, where do we agree? Where don't we agree? And so at least three of these I don't know much about besides name, and as I said, with a little bit I did on research prior to this video. Again, take it as you will and go from there. A few weeks ago, I also said that the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, is the most liberal of the Lutheran denominations theologically, and I always kind of put that emphasis there, theologically. And so we're going to look at a spectrum of Lutheran churches. So the ELCA is probably the most liberal. This is my left, so I'm holding it on my left side. Where the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod is probably the most conservative theologically in our spectrum of theological Lutheran churches in America, because there's also some in Europe so I'm just taking a look in America. So the ELCA is the largest of the group. It was formed in 1988. It is one of the younger ones because of the merger, though. You see, there were three predecessor bodies: the American Lutheran Church, the Association of Evangelical Lutherans, and the North American Lutheran Church. It was those three predecessor bodies that came together in 1988 to form what's now called the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, of which you and I are part of if you're a member of my congregation, or I have been your pastor in the past. That is the ELCA. On its stances, and I'll get into the details later, that's why I said it's the most liberal. Moving kind of along the spectrum, going towards the most conservative, the next Lutheran church that would be the newest one is the North American Lutheran Church, and that was formed in 2010. It was a split from the ELCA over the discussions around homosexuality, for whether LGBTQIA plus pastors should be ordained or not. That was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. But there was also a discussion prior to that, because they come from a group called Word Alone and some other different groups that were starting to form for a long time within the ELCA. And that was over the discussion of the historic episcopate. When the ELCA had a table fellowship with the Episcopal Church, one of the not demands, but one of the negotiating aspects of it is that an Episcopal priest or a Lutheran bishop, an Episcopal bishop or a Lutheran bishop who has had their hands laid on by Episcopal bishops be present at all ordinations. And I know some of you do not care about this at all, but this was what kind of started the spark over this. This is called the historic episcopate. The idea that we can trace things all the way back to Peter, the disciple, the apostle Peter, and go from there as to who has been ordained. And so, somebody like me was ordained prior to the merger or to the table fellowship with the Episcopal Church. I was ordained by a bishop, but not every Lutheran pastor was at the time. And so there were certain kind of qualifications that came along with that. But if you notice, anytime we have a new bishop or who gets present, the Episcopal bishop is also present and lays hands upon that new bishop's head. That's part of the agreement. And so that started, and then when the ELCA also allowed for LGBTQIA plus pastors to be practicing and in committed relationships, that was where the NALC began its roots and split and formed a new church, taking about 1 million members from the ELCA to form this new body. So kind of moving along the spectrum again, this is the one that I know the least about, and so I'll just kind of put what I know about it. The American Association of Lutheran Churches. Let me backtrack 1 second, sorry. So the NALC and the ELCA also ordain women. That is part of the split between all these churches and agreements. So those two churches, so the ELCA ordains LGBTQIA and women. The NALC ordains women, and of course men are all part of that too, but not LGBTQIA in committed relationships. And then, as I said, we move across the spectrum. So now we come to the American Association of Lutheran Churches. This was formed in 1987 after the ELCA, or just prior to the ELCA's merger. They decided that they did not want to ordain women, but women could be deacons in the church. So we have a small opening there. And so that was where that split was. Again, I don't know much about this denomination, so I'm just going to kind of leave it with what I know. And then kind of moving along the spectrum is probably the one that most people know and will compare to the ELCA, which is the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. That was formed in 1847. Now the differences, here's where the differences start to come. Actually, I'll do a list of all the differences in just a second. But more specifically, as we're talking about ordination, no women in leadership there in particular. No women can be ordained. No women, I don't think women can be present as deacons. But it also begins to start the closed table for communion, meaning that only Lutheran Church Missouri Synod members can take communion at Lutheran Church Missouri Synod tables. And I will put an asterisk that may not be true for every single one, but for the vast majority, and it's the kind of stance of the denomination, that's where we start to see some of the major differences. And as I said, when we're talking about theologically conservative, these are some of the things that I'm talking about. So no ordination of women, some churches no women in leadership whatsoever, and again, closed table when it comes to communion. And then we kind of move to the most conservative that I know of. I'm sure there's more, but there is the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. This was formed in 1850. There are no women in leadership. In fact, part of their stance, according to their online site, again, I've never sat in a pew, so I do not know, but no women's suffrage in matters concerning men. So no women voters within the leadership of the congregation. So again, that's me looking at their website. I don't know, but that's what the site says. So we'll take it there. So what's the difference between all these? When I say one's kind of more liberal than the other, what do I mean? Well, there's kind of 6 places that they all kind of differ. Some are in agreement, some aren't in agreement. In fact, the ELCA and the NALC will be in agreement for most, except for the ordination of LGBTQIA plus individuals. So just kind of lay it there. But the first is biblical inerrancy is the word. The ELCA recognizes that humans had a hand in writing the Bible, that God inspired it, humans wrote it, and so there will be differences in how the Bible was written, and the narratives go, and all of that. It's called historical criticism, where we kind of look back at the Bible and say, okay, some of this was written for a certain time, in a certain place, in a certain moment. And then as we kind of move along the spectrum, we go to inerrancy. In other words, there are no mistakes, it is completely God inspired, and therefore it does not contradict itself. It does not, there was no kind of human hand in the midst of it. So that's where along the spectrum you're going to start to see differences along it all. Again, probably the breaking point is where the American Association of Lutheran Churches are when it comes to biblical inerrancy. So that's where. The other one is what you've heard me kind of say throughout the video, is who is welcome at the table. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has a number of agreements with a number of denominations. The Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church are some of them, but we can have what's called open table, and so a lot of people are welcome at the table and take communion from us. In fact, when you come to my church in particular, you will hear me say, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, you are welcome at this table. And so that's where the differences start to split. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod practice what's called closed table. In other words, only members from that congregation and that denomination can have communion. You must talk with the pastor beforehand and go from there. Women in leadership was the other split between all the denominations. You heard me kind of say the split there begins at the American Association of Lutheran Churches, who allow for women deacons but no women pastors, and then from the rest of the spectrum there are no women pastors at all. The LGBTQIA plus community and who's welcome within the churches, the ELCA is the only one that allows for clergy who are LGBTQIA plus to be ordained and to be in committed relationships. That's where a main difference was. You see, the ELCA had for the stance for a long time that you could be gay and ordained, but you could not be a practicing gay person or lesbian person. You couldn't be in any sort of relationship. You had to abstain from any sort of relationship, and so a lot of people went underground, and I could talk about that for a little bit, but I'll just leave it at there. And that's where the ELCA differs from all the other Lutheran denominations. The Historic Episcopate, that's also where the ELCA differs from all the Lutheran denominations, and that was primarily because of our agreement with the Episcopal Church. Again, that's the idea that we can trace all ordinations back to Peter, and so a bishop, Episcopal bishop, has to be present and lay hands upon a Lutheran bishop, because a Lutheran bishop must be present to ordain all pastors within the ELCA. And then the final one is where people stand on creationism versus evolution. The ELCA is pretty open with its interpretation, saying you can decide what you want to believe. We don't have a particular stance on it, where as you go, especially since it's biblical inerrancy and the idea that God did it. So the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod states that God created the world in 7 days exactly, and that's what you are to believe. And so Again, I'm broad brushing because I don't want to get into deep specifics where I could be completely wrong about something. And again, I haven't sat with three of the denominations. I would like, that chance sometime. I've had the most interactions with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and the NALC members, because especially with the NALC, some of them were my friends who decided to go to this new denomination that was forming, which was heartbreaking, I'll tell you the truth, during that time. And so those are the other groups that I have the most interactions with, where I've actually sat in worship or talked with pastors there. And so I will say, as a pastor, most of the time, everybody's friendly. We talk together. It's only on the larger levels that we start getting into the arguments. Some pastors will snub other pastors, but I have not found that in my journey with other groups. I've often sat at the table and just kind of chatted and say, here's where we agree. Isn't that awesome? But here's where we disagree. Have I had interactions that were very negative? Yeah, I've had that too. I won't go into specifics, but to give you a sense, when I was at RIT as chaplain, prior actually to me becoming the chaplain there, it was an ELCA, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod ministry, and then the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod felt that they could not be in fellowship with us after we allowed for gay and lesbian pastors, and so they withdrew from the RIT community, but it allowed for a new community to form with the Episcopal Church. That's when I kind of took over as chaplain there. But it was a little nasty during that time, and so I've had some negative interactions too, but mostly positive, and I think that's important, that we can talk to one another, that we're not enemies, but we're brethren and sisters and siblings in Christ, and I think that's important to add. Again, I will be away for the next week, so I hope you think about some new questions, and if there are, I will continue this series. Otherwise, I will sign off for this time and wish you a blessed day. Take care, everybody.